Hey everyone, today for another vlog, and for today I want to talk about being sensitive in a insensitive world. So today I came across a post discussing the problem that intelligent and creative people face. So the people who have like those two traits, in that those people can acquire like a lot of success, right? Or they can do a lot of things and they can get really good at their fields. But the problem that those people face often is that they burn out or their whole personal life is a mess and so on. And I was interested in that because I wouldn't say like I'm a hugely intelligent or hugely creative person, but I kind of have both of these traits, right? Whereas most people usually only have one on the other. And yeah, I very much relate with the whole, burning out, not being able to rest, and all that. And so the post also kind of mentioned something about addictions, and as someone who has had a pretty complicated history of porn addiction, and to this day still kind of, although it's not as hugely dominating in my life, still still a problem, I would say. Well, I was interested in reading the interview from the person was Dr. Gaber Mante. I don't really remember the specific name. I'm looking it up as I speak. But so yeah, it was a great interview. I wouldn't say like I got any like major paradigm shift right in my understanding of myself, but I got a lot of like interesting terms and a lot of like important like focus on some of aspects of my personal life. So let me see. The person's name is Dr. Gabe Mate. Yeah, Mate probably. So I'm gonna link the interview in the video. And so the first concept that really spoke to me was the concept of sensitivity and the link between sensitivity and trauma. Right? So trauma is something I've been quite familiar with for a while now, but sensitivity is not really something that I consider myself. And actually, now that I look at it, it's actually incredibly obvious how sensitive I used to be as a child. Which is, sensitivity is it's a double-edged sword. But that's kind of the whole interview. Well, I guess not the whole interview. The interview is about a lot of things, but one of the point that he mentions that sensitivity is a double-edged sword because on one hand it makes you more creative, as he mentions, and I guess the reason why he doesn't really explain why, but I guess the reason why is that are more you just absorb more from your environment, right? You just observe more, you feel more, and so on. So it makes you more creative. But on the other hand, it also means that you also feel the pain of people more, and that means that you suffer a lot more from trauma than other people because it doesn't take as much let's say background fear or people making fun of you and all that to make you feel bad. So you you suffer a lot more from trauma when you're sensitive. And I think when I look back at my childhood, I was incredibly sensitive because, well, for a very simple reason is that I used to cry all the time when I was a kid, and people used to make fun of me for that. So that would even amplify the crying. And as like when I entered into secondary school, so when I was like 12 and above, I sort of stopped crying, and at that time I thought it was because I thought like I was growing up and was becoming more mature, but the reality was that I shut down emotionally, so to survive basically, was so there was sort of like a defense mechanism to keep myself from being laughed at by other people. So that was a um, social survival mechanism, so to speak, and that's still leaves many remnants to this day, right? The emotional repression and all that, and yeah, it's kind of crazy how being sensitive can lead you to become emotionally repressed because the reason being that the sensitivity is too much for you to handle, and people don't allow your sensitivity, right? Hence the title, being sensitive in an insensitive world. People don't allow the sensitivity, and so you kind of end up going back the other way, so to speak. So you end up being emotionally shut down. So it's very interesting how that works. But now I see that my sensitivity is actually it's a huge strength of mine. It simply was never really allowed to be expressed, but it's actually a huge strength because it means that I actually see things that a lot of people don't. Like, you know, I think even really early on in my life, I definitely felt how difficult life is for a lot of people. Like, right, how they don't have like the luck that I would have. People growing up in really awful environments and growing up with either lack of money or abusive families, or growing up in a country that doesn't have any infrastructure to support them, and so on. It's you know even early on as a kid, I definitely felt this sense that life is quite unfair. Actually, it's very unfair, and it never really. I never really felt guilt about that, but I definitely felt that there's something quite wrong about the way we organize our society. Where some people are so rich that they don't even think about the problems of survival. Like, to them food is a complete given, right? It's not even like something that you have to think about. Whereas for other people, food is literally the only thing they can think about, because that's what they need throughout the entire day. And so, yeah, I think even very early on in my life, I definitely had the sense that because of how much pain there is in this world, like there's something deeply wrong about our society, and how deeply, like, maybe not unequal is maybe is not the right word, but like it's deeply like insensitive, right? So deeply shut down. Like we just uh we just exploit people from across the globe, and we put them, from and we because we don't have to like directly exploit people, but instead we can indirectly exploit them through low costs and um exploitation and all that. We don't have to feel bad about ourselves, but it's still there, right? The exploitation is still there, some things like that. Like there's something deeply exploitative, coercive about this society, and it's obviously still something I feel to this day, very much so. Right? I talk a lot about society, and my previous blog was obviously all about society and how to navigate it. And yeah, it's not a very pretty picture, right? So the link between, to come back on the topic of sensitivity, the link between sensitivity and trauma is very simple. It's that when you are sensitive, you also are more sensitive to your parents and the people around you, and that means that you get traumatized a lot more easily, right? And this has massive implications because trauma is such prominent thing in our society, and it has so many types of expression, right? It's absolutely unbelievable how someone could live basically their entire life going from one trauma response to another, and each trauma response can look really really different from one another. Right? So I talked about this in my previous video even, but it was a 1 hour 20 minutes video. But you could go from like being a people pleaser who just bends backwards for everyone, who just does spends all their energy trying to please other people and to make them happy, and you could go from that to like another uh, social interaction where you're trying to make yourself invisible because you don't want to be there, and you don't really feel connected with the people, and so you just want to uh, minimize the interaction as much as possible with them, and so you sort of try to make yourself small and invisible. To another situation where I'm sort of talking about personal stuff, by the way, so this is actually quite personal. And to another one, which is trying to constantly make yourself busy and distracting yourself on the internet, having really loud music, watching porn, going from one project to another very quickly, right? So these are the fawn, freeze, and flight responses respectively. So fawn is people pleasing, freeze is making yourself invisible, and flight is the busyness, right? So distracting yourself and all that. It's quite crazy that your entire life could literally be just one trauma response after another, and never really getting out of the cycle. And yeah, it very much resonates with me that uh, this link between sensitivity and trauma, and as a result, the link between sensitivity and addiction, right? Because well, addiction is one huge symptom of trauma. Well, it's not like a symptom. It's more like a in between a root cause and a symptom, right? So addictions do make your life worse, but they are not the root cause of your problems, very likely. The root cause is very likely trauma. And the addiction is a coping mechanism to all of this trauma, right? Like all of this pain Uh, Addiction is often a way to like override the pain in whether it is physical pain or often it's emotional pain. And yeah, like there are many forms of addiction, and I like that in the interview he didn't limit addiction to just substances because especially with porn, right? Like that's a huge one for me. That to me that completely shadows this idea that addiction is just about substance. Like there's definitely such a thing as porn addiction. And it's not a substance. Porn addiction is different from other addictions, I have to say. It doesn't have the same withdrawal symptoms, and it is worth keeping track of that different and those differences. But it has important differences. But at the same time, the core of the addiction, the core of the mechanism, it's exactly the same. Right? Like, it's built on a foundation of emotional pain, coping with pain, and people talk about don't think about the addiction, try to understand the pain instead, and that's really true. Like the root of addiction is very much pain, for my case at least. And so it has porn addiction has the same foundation of like pain, and it has this same sense of shame and all that, and difficulty quitting and all that. It's so similar that I really don't like people limiting addiction to substances. And in there, he also talks about something that I was very keenly aware of is that obesity is actually an emotional issue. Obesity is addiction to food, and it's using food as a way to cope with anxiety again, right? So uh, anxiety has very much been on the rise, and there's sort of been seems like there's sort of been a feedback loop between our environment becoming more difficult. Like it's more difficult, for example, for people to survive generally with increasing prices and job markets being harder and all that. And so it seems like there's sort of been an increasing feedback loop of like trauma and people being anxious all the time, and this rise of like ADHD with the internet as well. Right? The internet provides us with many coping mechanisms which are not healthy in the long term. Yeah, it's quite eye-opening for me to see that I'm a very sensitive person actually, and that it makes a lot of sense to look back at my life in that lens because like sometimes I think about like do people not how to say like sometimes I look at my back my life and like do people not feel anxious all the time? And I think the reason why I feel so anxious all the time is really because I've been picking up on like my the anxiety of my parents, right? So like that is one form of trauma. Is not necessarily your parent being abusive to you, but more like growing up in an environment where you're just scared all the time, right? So you could imagine someone living in a war zone and maybe nothing ever happened to them, and maybe they were like in the periphery of the war zone, so nothing really happened to them, but the constant fear surrounding them through their childhood is something that they absolutely pick up right as a child. You can children absolutely understand emotions before words, right? So I feel like a child doesn't even need to understand what the parents are arguing about to just feel that there's an argument and so on, right? So the children pick up on that anxiety, and that anxiety because the parents are not there to like help the child deal with it and like metabolize it. It sort of it absolutely becomes trauma, right? It sort of becomes trauma, and so that is like one form of that is probably the main form of trauma actually. Because most people I think don't really suffer from like terribly abusive events. It's either like a thousand cuts, like it's either like a thousand emotional cuts, or it's more like a lack of support by their parents and a general like tense atmosphere. I think is mostly the source of trauma. I would say in the West, but certainly right in there are people who obviously want to like obviously experience many very traumatizing events, such as war or like having someone die close to them when they were young, or having being physically or sexually abused. Those things absolutely exist, of course, but I don't think they constitute the majority of trauma. And so yeah, seeing myself as a sensitive person, it makes a lot of sense because I just I just feel very tense when I'm in a tense situation, right? Like it's my body sensations are very much coupled with like the external situation, whether it is like the general atmosphere of a conversation. I noticed this yesterday because today because at work, like a lot of conversations have this really cynical and negative uh, vibe behind it, for like a better word. Like it's just people like laughing at how powerless they are and how shitty the situation is, and you know they laugh it off, and you know it's clear as day that this laugh it's just well it's cope, right? It's cope, and people who don't want to admit to that something is that a situation is uncomfortable or painful. It makes me wonder, like, am I really sensitive as a person, or is the entire world insensitive? You know, sometimes I wonder because to me those things are as clear as day that people just wear masks all the time. They were they were like social masks, they were emotional masks and all that. Like social mask being the role you're pretending in front of people, right? An emotional mask being well, it's also social, but it's also like with yourself, right? You can also lie to yourself, of course. And that is where the lie starts. In fact, right? That is where the mask starts. In fact, it's when you hide things from yourself because if you're honest with yourself, it's very difficult to be honest to lie to other people. But yeah, it's rather insane, right? And one anecdote that just comes to me when I just really felt like there was something deeply wrong about parenting and how no one seems to really notice that. Is I remember once walking down the street, and I remember hearing a parent talk to. I couldn't see what I was just hearing sounds. I was just hearing the conversation. I was hearing a parent basically talk to what I assumed was a dog. By the way, by the tone, they were like obeying ordering the other. It was actually a person, right? But I thought it was a dog, and I thought by the way they were talking that they were just getting really angry at the dog and ordering it around. But actually, as I looked and saw the person, it was actually like his daughter. Like he was talking to his daughter, and I thought he was talking to a dog. With how absolutely just coercive and just it felt so inhuman. Like it didn't feel like that's how you would talk to any human, let alone your own child. And that was when I felt like really bad. Like it felt like there was something really deeply wrong about parenting at that time, and I still feel that way. That in general, I think parenting is a deeply flawed thing that we don't know how to do in modern society. As much as we pride ourselves on like our science and all that, like it's crazy to me how parenting is like basically stuck in the dark ages. You might even be worse than the dark ages because at least when people are ignorant, they they might know that they're ignorant, but now that we're in the modern world, we have like this pretense that we understand things and all that, so people don't bother looking and asking ourselves whether we actually understand this thing or not, right? So it might actually be even worse than the dark ages because at least in the dark ages they wouldn't pretend to understand the world because like the external results were clearly not good, but in the modern world we have good external results, but our relationships with one another are not so good on the other hand. So yeah, I don't think I really have anything to add. It was kind of a free-flowing vlog. I still spoke for 20 minutes, interestingly enough. Yeah, it's an interesting topic about sensitivity. It's not something you hear a lot about because sensitivity is always framed as a weakness, right? Like people just say, "Oh, you're so sensitive," and it was always framed as a weakness to me when I was a kid, right? Like people were saying how I cried all the time and that I should grow up and that I should become more. I don't think anyone ever said to me that I should become more manly, but they definitely told me that I should stop crying so much, right? And looking back, I'm definitely glad that I went through that because I'm at least I'm very glad that this is how I am. That this is no, as a very sensitive person, it's a double-edged sword for sure. Like you definitely feel a lot more pain, but I think I would much rather feel too much pain than to be emotionally shut off from people and to pretend like there is nothing wrong and so on. So I'm very glad that this is how I am personally. And yeah, this is about everything I had to say for today. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.